the primary military objective for Russia is they call it the liberation of Donbass. Ukrainians will call it the occupation of Donbass, but bringing the totality of the Donbass under Russian control. And that's ongoing. They now have sufficient forces to do that. They also have more than sufficient forces to hold the Kherson bridgehead, which secures Crimea and makes viable the land bridge that connects Crimea to the Donbass. This is all now secured with a solid defense line, troops that are mutually supportive, reserves in place, artillery in place. The Russians are in a very strong position to accomplish one of the stated objectives, which is the liberation of Donbass. But here's the problem. There's two other stated objectives out there.
Scott,
one is, go ahead.
Have you been reading my questions? I was going to ask you, did Russia achieve its set out or stated objectives, which was, I think you were going to get to the next one, which is denazification, demilitarization.
Demilitarization, yeah.
How would you view that right now in September 2022?
Are you getting nervous, Richard? Do you think that I have cameras in your room? I'm reading down your notes. Like I said, I think they're in position to accomplish one of the three. They're going to, I believe, in the foreseeable future, retake Donbass, and there's nothing the Ukrainians can do to stop them. But now here's the crux: demilitarization. From the Russian definition of what that entails, it was the removal of all NATO infrastructure, NATO affiliation, etc., from the Ukrainian military. I just told you that the Ukrainian military doesn't exist anymore, and it doesn't. The Russians destroyed the Ukrainian military, defeated Ukrainian military in May, June, and July. All the equipment the Ukrainian military used to have is gone. The structures that existed, they've been weakened, eliminated. The Ukrainians were forced to throw territorial defense units, untrained reservists, into the front lines. One of the reasons why they had such high casualties is they had totally untrained troops buying time for these reserves to be accumulated. So they sacrificed men for time. The army that did come in was a NATO military. So now when we're talking demilitarization, what we're really saying is that the entirety of the Ukrainian military has to go bye-bye. How's that going to happen? One of two ways. Either the Russians defeat it on the field of battle, annihilate it, or they get them to surrender and voluntarily disarm, or somewhere in between. Bad news for Russia right now. With 200,000 troops, you don't have sufficient military power to accomplish that objective. You allowed NATO to infuse almost $100 billion worth of equipment and support into Ukraine. You gave Ukraine the strategic depth so they can reconstitute their military without fear of consequence. Imagine if you're a Ukrainian soldier trying to be trained, and every night you went to bed in your barracks outside of Lvov, and you said, oh, good Lord, a Caliber missile might come in and kill me tonight. The quality of your training has diminished greatly because you're not focused on this. You're worried about this, and the people who are training you have to be worried too, so they have to alter the training plan, break it up. You can't bring everybody together. But now they get to go to Europe. They get to go to big NATO training facilities in Germany and France, Poland and England, and they get to train without fear. They get a good meal, get good night's sleep. They're happy-go-lucky. And then they come in well-trained, rested, equipped, and they move this unit in, and NATO's done a great job of building rat lines. And that's what I mean is like a smuggling route. Mm-hmm. The Russians, of course, aren't stupid. They're out there trying to interdict, but they're getting beat. Whatever NATO's doing is better than Russia's ability to stop them from doing it. So NATO is successfully getting these troops into Ukraine and getting them to the front lines. Again, none of that offensive would have happened had the Russians been able to interdict them at the border, interdict them en route. Russia didn't, and it wasn't for a lack of trying. So again, make fun of NATO all you want, make fun of Ukraine all you want. They're winning that aspect of the war. When the history's written, we can sit here and say, oh, the Russians will get high praise for blowing up the dam and all this stuff, brilliant military. People are going to be studying how Ukraine and NATO got all of these weapons over the border and to the front line, while Russia, with total control of the airspace, failed to interdict them. It's a major failing on the part of Russia, and they're going to have to tighten that up if they want to win. Because if they don't, it's only going to complicate the war going forward because NATO's just going to keep repeating this puzzle over and over again, this process. So demilitarization, you're going to need many more men. And again, I don't want to sit here and pretend that I can think for the Russians, but I'm pretty good at military math. And when I run through the calculation and all that stuff, they're going to need 300 to 400,000 men to accomplish the task. They can't do it with what they have now. And even with 300, 400,000, it's going to be a slower battle. It's not going to be a broad front all the way across. It means you secure the Donbass, then you go to Odessa. You link up with Transnistria, and then you secure that defense. You get more forces. You go up and you push your way into Kharkov and hook that up and take that area. And in the process, hopefully destroy as much of the Ukrainian military as possible. Meanwhile, you carry out a strategic air campaign in the rear, again, which respects the civilian infrastructure, which complicates your purpose. I will tell you this, if they were hitting civilian infrastructure from, what we call civilian infrastructure, rail lines, roads, bridges, if they blew all that, which we did in Gulf War, this rat line wouldn't work. So that NATO, at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that the Russians are actually helping NATO succeed by not doing what is necessary to actually shut down the totality of the people's ability to move in the depth of Ukraine. But that's a strategic decision that Russia made because they don't want to destroy Ukraine. They want Ukraine to be a livable space when this war is done. But they're paying a heavy price for that. So there's that. Now we get to denazification. Hey guys, all you have to do is take a look at all the selfies coming out of Kharkiv. And what do you see? Azov emblem after Azov emblem after Azov emblem. Look, yeah, Azov suffered a major defeat in Mariupol. Thousands of them were taken prisoners. But the ideology is alive. And it's motivating people to sign up and join. And the hateful presence of Stepan Bandera is alive and well and living in the Ukrainian military today and in the Ukrainian body politic. And what I'm trying to get at here is saying that when we speak of denazification, it's no longer a matter of simply getting the Ukrainian parliament to pass a new constitution that bans Bandera, getting rid of the monuments, outlawing political parties. It's going to be the total dismantlement of Ukrainian society. When we say denazification, it's going to resemble what occurred in Germany at the end of World War II and what occurred in Iraq at the end of the 2003 invasion, de-Baathification. It's that kind of totality that's going to be necessary to cleanse Ukraine of this ideology, which means it's a virtual occupation of all of Ukraine. This includes Kiev, this includes Lvov. Russia doesn't have sufficient military power allocated to the special military operation to accomplish this task. So they're going to need more military power. So now we come down to the question of, does this mean that it's over for Russia? Well, the short answer is yes, unless Russia's willing to double the size of its forces. Why do I say that? It doesn't mean that Ukraine's going to beat Russia. Ukraine's never going to take Crimea. Ukraine's never going to take Kherson. They're never going to eliminate the land bridge. They're not going to retake Donbass. But what they can do is create a stalemate that has a permanent line of conflict, which means that Ukrainian artillery will forever threaten civilian settlements in the in Lugansk and Donetsk, in Mariupol, in Kherson, even in Crimea. There'll be a threat of drone strikes. This will be a never-ending war of attrition on the line. And you know who wins that? Ukraine. Why? Because they weren't denazified, because they weren't demilitarized, because NATO is now alive and well and living in Ukraine. You don't have to say I'm a NATO member to be a NATO country. Ukraine is more of a NATO country today than most NATO countries.
They got more NATO weapons too.
They have a better NATO military. Here's the thing. I'll say this right up front, that those 30,000 guys that fought and died for the Ukrainians in this offensive would have beat any army NATO has, any army, with the possible exception of the United States, and only if we reinforced it with forces from the U.S. The existing American infrastructure in Europe could not have stood up to the Ukrainian army. The German army would have been defeated in a week. The French army would have been defeated in a week.
Don't say the British one.
Pardon?
Don't say the British one as well.
British Army doesn't exist, so it'd be
doesn't.
defeated in a day. The fact is, the Ukrainians are really, really good, really, really good. They're better than anything NATO's got, which means that it takes a lot of effort to beat them. The fact that the Russians are doing as well as they do means the Russians are really, really, really good. But there's not enough of really, really, really good people to beat the really, really good Ukrainians unless you increase the number. So that's going to be the number one task for Russia going forward. I think they have two things coming up, two special reinforcements. The first one is General Mud. General Mud arrives, and my Russian is horrible, but I think it's the Rasputitsa, the muddy season. And when that hits, nothing moving. I'll tell you, when you read my book, you'll see that I mentioned it as an inspector. When we were trying to simply build something in Vodkinsk, the muddy season came in, and the mud gets everywhere. You're breathing it, you're eating it, it's in your hair, it's everywhere. Your vehicles bog down. There's a reason why the Russians build these vehicles with big wheels and high wheelbase, because they're going through seas of mud, and Ukraine is going to turn into a sea of mud, a morass of mud. Nothing's going to move, and this is good for both sides because it's going to bring an operational pause. And then what's going to happen is General Winter's going to come in, and here the Russians have the advantage. They have the cold weather gear. They have better defenses. They have access to heating, food, energy, all that stuff. The Russians are going to be able to ride out the winter better than their Ukrainian counterparts. Already the Ukrainians are screaming they need 200,000 sets of cold weather gear. NATO's only able to give them 100,000 sets. The guys on the front line are going to be freezing to death. Not only the guys on the front line, but the civilians in the back. And believe me, if you want to impact the morale of troops on the front, have the civilians in the rear suffer. It makes the troops on the front feel like crap. So General Winter is going to hit, and not just hit Ukraine, it's going to hit Europe. All these people right now, the political and economic elite in Europe who are providing the support to Ukraine, only exist with the theory of economic ruin. It hasn't hit reality yet. It's still relatively warm in Europe. It's getting colder, though. I bet you the leaves are starting to change. And you know what that means. Then the rain's going to come, sweaters are going to come out, and all of a sudden, frost. And with frost comes ice. And with ice comes snow. And then Europe, I tell you what, if you're religious in Europe, start praying for a mild winter because it's your only hope.